So our theme of this convention attempts to shed light on the topic of illusion. And we find with illusion, there's many kinds of illusion. And these lead to, unfortunately, delusion. I think delusion is probably quite an apt word, because it's unfortunately something that we end up, for various reasons, trapped into life after life. And this really is because we don't see the world and ourselves as it is and it really is. And we think possibly others, the universe, God is responsible for the woes and trials and tribulations that we find ourselves in. And it's little realised that the responsibility for our own lives or our own evolution in life really is up to us. And Edward Arnold described this really nicely in The Light of Asia. He said, "Ye suffer from yourselves, none else compels. None other hold you, that ye live and die, and whirl upon the wheel, and hug and kiss its spokes of agony, its tire of tears, its nave of nothingness." And this illusion, or maya in Sanskrit, really arises, I think, fundamentally from ignorance. And this really can be annihilated by the awakening to vidya, or knowledge. Knowledge of the truth, which informs the soul, that is Brahman, which is essentially the divine. As we awaken from our dreams and cyclic wanderings on earth, maya starts to begin to fade like the mist before the morning sun. And at our disposal, if we would just realise it, we have a wonderful instrument called manas, which is mind and intellect. And these are the fifth principle in theosophical terminology of man. And manas, or mind, is really one of the tasks that has being set for us in this fifth sub-race, or we might call it a Masonic fifth sub-race of the Masonic fifth root race. So it's the root race sub-race is that of mind. And if we think back to the Atlantean days, that our emotional nature was the primary focus then. And by and large, we've got under control the physical, by and large the emotional, but the mental is what we're working on at the moment. So as we look to move beyond this illusionary state, Madame Blavatsky tells us in The Voice of Silence, before the soul can see, the harmony within must be attained, and the fleshy eyes rendered blind to all illusion. So on this journey, our journey of awakening, unfolding consciousness, enlightenment, call it what you will, we see the higher self quicken its pace and turn its attention to transforming the lower nature, a thing which in the beginning really cognizes what and who it is. As time marches on, the soul compels the personality to modify outward actions as inner motives become truer and purer. This is not an external pressure, it can only come from within. And the poet Khalil Gibran, he penned the well-known book The Prophet, and he said it really well. The veil that clouds your eyes shall be lifted by the hands that wove it. So it's up to us to do the hard work. So in Hindu philosophy, there are many paths to reaching this divine we're talking about and removing illusion along the way. And there's a number of paths, quite a few different paths, but some of the more well-known ones would be like Hatha Yoga. There's control of body, breath, vitality. Karma Yoga, selfless action. You think of the TOS or Mother Teresa. Mantra Yoga is around sacred utterances, mantras and syllables. Bhakti Yoga is the path of compassion and love. And Jnana Yoga is the path of wisdom and knowledge, which we'll have a look shortly. And of course, Raja Yoga, which is the beautiful synthesis of all of these yogas put together, probably the cream of everything, the king of yogas. So which yogic path we choose really depends heavily on our own temperaments. Some people are well disposed to one path or another, and that might be because of the monadic ray they came in, or perhaps for some of the learnings and what they've been doing for a series of lives. And therefore we may have developed one side of our nature more than others. Jeffrey Hodgson said that success in yoga includes the gradual and effective broadening of the whole intuitive and intellectual nature of the aspirant, so that he or she begins to know the great laws and principles underlying the incarnation of a logos in a universe, in order that they may begin to be shared as experiences in consciousness, this being part of the meaning of the word yoga. Truly, this is aided by meditation and sublimation, and this is the part of their value in one's occult life. The qualities of deep compassion and great and grave tenderness are needed in the development of a Christ-like nature. And this Christ-like nature that Jeffrey's talking about really refers to our spiritual wisdom, our Buddhic nature. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter which path we take, because nature requires well-rounded individuals, and eventually we will develop along all of these lines. But today I'd like to explore one of these paths, and that being of Jnana Yoga. On this path, the aspirant studies spiritual teachings in a special way, seeking to raise his or her consciousness so that they can realise these truths themselves, instead of merely becoming acquainted with the conceptual side of the teachings. So what is Jnana Yoga? Well, the word Jnana means to know, and Jnana Yoga is a practice where reality is discovered through insight, practice and knowledge. Jnana is considered the most difficult of the four main paths of yoga, requiring great strength of will and intellect. In Jnana Yoga, the mind is used to inquire into its own nature and to transcend the mind's identification with its thought and small ego. It seeks by knowledge and by the mastery of intellect to attain unity with the Supreme. Mr. Hodson said that the yogi must transcend entirely his human nature and enter the consciousness of his immortal self, penetrate by yoga past even the abstract mind into the intuition, and there dwell in mystic silence upon his quest for ultimate truth. So you can see this is the most difficult thing to achieve. And if we look at this seeking of unity with the Supreme, this is beautifully alluded to in a poem by Robert Browning. He said, "For I have seen in lonely places and in lonelier hours my vision of the rainbow aureoled face, of her whom men call beauty, proud, austere, dim vision of the flawless, perfect face, divinely fugitive, that haunts the world and lifts men's spiral thoughts to lovelier dreams." Trying to raise our consciousness higher and higher as we can get. Jnana Yoga is the yoga of true knowledge and wisdom. It is based on the Hindu philosophy of non-dualism, called Advaita Vedanta, and of which the teacher Adi Shankaracharya is well known. He was instrumental in unifying and establishing the main currents of thought in Hinduism. There are similar non-dualist views of reality held in many religions, including branches of Buddhism, including Zen, Taoism, Islamic Sufism, as well as some branches of Christianity. In the 19th century, Swami Vivekananda was a key figure to introducing Vedanta and yoga to the West. He spoke and wrote on the subject of Jnana Yoga, and this is what he said. "Now this knowledge again is inherent in man. No knowledge comes from outside. It is all inside. What we say a man knows should, in strict psychological language, be what he discovers or unveils. What a man learns is really what he discovers by taking the cover off his own soul, which is a mind of infinite knowledge." And you can imagine the photograph that Tim was talking about on Friday night. It's all there, but we're just slowly unravelling that photo to reveal more. So we might ask ourselves, what is knowledge? I'd like to attempt, no doubt poorly, to explain what is meant by knowledge, because terminology can quite often lead us astray and colour our perceptions about what is being said. Swami Vivekananda, and indeed Jnana Yoga, uses the word knowledge in another sense of the word. We typically think of knowledge as facts and figures acquired through educational learning, practical or theoretical. We think of it as having our heads full of interesting and useful facts and figures, which generally goes under the category of book learning. But Jnana Yoga uses a different lens on this word, one that is less often associated with what we're talking about. And it uses the word knowledge in the sense of direct perception, of awareness, consciousness and realization. So the object of this yoga of knowledge is to educate the mind to perceive and know the one divine self in all things and within the divine self. So the early Vedic philosophers, they knew a person couldn't know everything there was to know. The cosmos is so vast and so complex, a million incarnations, you couldn't understand the contents of its wonders whatsoever, or our place in the grand scheme of things. But after much inquiry, a clue was found. They saw that to know the nature of clay, one could know the nature of everything made of clay. To understand the nature of gold or iron, one could understand the nature of everything made of gold or iron. Therefore, is there not likewise, they asked, something that is the basic material of the universe, by the knowing of which everything in the universe will be known? The answer, of course, is self. Know thyself. Jnana Yoga includes understanding and penetrative perception with ever-increasing interior comprehension, whether in flashes or during prolonged deliberations. It leads to the depthity of unveiled perception, or as Master Kuthumi has written, implicit insight. Einstein touches on this when he said, the intellect has little to do on this road of discovery. There comes a leap in consciousness, call it intuition or what you will, and the solution comes to you and you don't know why or how. He said all great discoveries are made this way. Jnana Yoga helps gain insight into the truth about who we are and what we are experiencing. The full realization of this truth brings enlightenment, but how to recognize truth? When we want to know the truth about something, we do not want to be fooled by appearances, by that which only appears and then disappears. Knowing truth cannot mean to know now this or that, only to become something else later, depending on circumstances. So truth is that which lies beyond appearance and illusion, and thus is never changing. There may be relative, temporary or partial truth. In Jnana Yoga, however, the object is to know the absolute truth about yourself and your experiences. You have to look beyond the mere aspects of you and your experiences that change all the time. In asking questions and inquiring, we seek to go beyond illusion to find the essential over-self. The techniques of meditation or Raja Yoga are very important for a Jnana Yogi, as they allow one to get a glimpse of the self or the supreme reality behind appearances. Therefore, in Jnana Yoga, the approach to the truth of what you are leans on intuitive flashes and recommends an intense meditative openness and reflection on reality, the self, the true nature of what we call a human being. As such, Jnana Yoga concerns the whole of humanity. Before we look at the principles and practices of Jnana Yoga, it is worthwhile looking at cultivating right view or right understanding, as found in the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path. As mentioned earlier, our illusion arises from the fact that we do not see, and we often willfully refuse to see things as they are, and thus fall under the deluding play of our own bewildered inner faculties. For example, the extremist of any kind, however sincere he or she may be, is entangled in the web of their own misunderstandings. This fact alone has immense moral import, for it teaches us to be kindly towards others, recognising our own weaknesses and of understanding, and also our strong biases and tendencies to see things through a glass darkly. The scientist of 100 years ago, who had what are now proved to be wrong ideas about the physical universe, and who was quite fanatical in thinking that he had attained truth, was under the maya of his time, as well as a maya brought about by his own imperfect vision. Just so, the religionist, who held theological teachings which the greater knowledge of our day has shown to be false, or only partly true, was labouring under a similar maya. So striving towards right understanding or right view is a significant step on the path as it relates to seeing the world and everything in it as it really is, not as we believe or want it to be. Just as we may read directions on a map and then make the journey, studying, reading and examining the information is important, but it's only the preparation for the journey. At a deeper level, direct personal experience will then lead us to right understanding. And this is a lot of what Dorothy's been talking to us about, the perception and a right worldview. In his book, Old Path, White Clouds, Thich Nhat Hanh tells the story of the Buddha. The Buddha says, "My teaching is not a dogma or a doctrine, but no doubt some people will take it as such." The Buddha goes on to say, "I must state clearly that my teaching is a method to experience reality and not reality itself. Just as a finger pointing at the moon is not the moon itself. A thinking person makes use of a finger to see the moon. A person who only looks at the finger and mistakes it for the moon will never see the real moon." Armed with these thoughts in mind, let's take a brief look at what constitutes Jnana Yoga. It has 4 principles or disciplines. These have also been called the pathway to discipleship, and all yogic paths lean on them to a greater or lesser extent. The purpose is to remove ignorance, the barrier to self-knowledge. We could compare this to a wind that blows away a dark cloud hiding the radiance of the sun. So the first one, and I think personally probably the most important one, is discrimination. Now I have put some Sanskrit terms up there because some of the English translations may or not be accurate, or you get different ones wherever you're looking or reading, so I've put those up just in case you're interested. But discrimination is to be gained by thoughtfulness and practice. Here the student dwells mentally on the nature of the real, the one reality. As the Upanishads say, lead me from the unreal to real. This opening of the door of the mind or conversion is what is spoken of in the Bible. Set your affection on things above and not on things of the earth. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. Discrimination between the seer and the seeing is the road leading to the realization of truth. The seer is the unchangeable and homogeneous consciousness, or the knowing principle. It is the perceiver, the subject, the real ego. The seen is what is perceived. It is outside the seer, and therefore identical with the object. It is matter, non-self, non-ego. The seen is multiple and changing. Applied to our daily living, discrimination is much stimulated by the rapidly changing circumstances into which the disciple is generally thrown, with a view to impressing on him or her the instability of all things. The aspirant could try daily to strip away something of oneself that changes, a body, a mood, a thought. Eckhart Tolle said, "What a liberation to realise that the voice in my head is not who I am. Who am I then? The one who sees that." An example of applied discrimination might be seeing oneself as without anger. Anger is not self. When we see an angry man, woman or child, see the person with passion while it is raging. Treat it as being nothing, an appearance, an illusion. Then we have Vairagya, which is translated generally as renunciation or dispassion. From a recognition of the instability and unsatisfying nature of internal things, indifference to them naturally follows. the aspirant becomes indifferent to the things that come and go, and more fixes the attention on the changeless reality that is ever present. It is only when the mind is absolutely free from the attachment of all sorts that true knowledge begins to dawn. Without discrimination, true Vairagya is impossible. And then it moves to the 6 treasures. And through the practice of yoga, the following ethical principles, we're able to overcome false attachments and other lower qualities such as passion and anger, delusion and greed and so forth. We can transform these destructive energies into positive energies. Thus prepared, we start to raise the treasures into the daylight. The first one is control of thought, which is really aiming to reduce the chaos and turmoil in one's mind and emotions, wandering thoughts. So daily practice and concentration and meditation greatly help here. And then we have action, following in the control of thought. We try to exert self-control over outer action, making the lower vehicles obey the mind. Self-control really means developing willpower and determinative faculties which control the sense organs. Then tolerance. This is the quiet acceptance of each man, woman and child, each form of existence as it is, without demand that it should be something different, shaped to our own liking. How often is this the cause of pain and sorrow in our relationships? And endurance means the attitude of mind that cheerfully bears all and resents nothing, going straight onwards, unswerving to the goal. It helps to realise that the life of a disciple is generally one of storm and stress, in order that qualities and faculties may be forced into swift growth and speedily brought to perfection, even though we may not like it. And then we need faith, and this really is about the certainty of one's direction and persistence when we've got the teachings and we've got the practices. When we run into these storms of life, we don't want to give up. We want to have inner conviction that we are on the right path. And with this we add focus and balance, where we're trying to harmonise the mind, thoughts and emotions. And then the fourth main principle or tenet is a constant striving for God or the divine. It's a deep, intense longing for liberation, that yearning for the soul towards union with the divine. And Jnana Yoga has 3 practices for those that follow the Advaita path. And these come from the Upanishads. The first one is about hearing, and it broadly refers to perception and observations, typically aided by a teacher or guru, where the student listens to the scriptures and discusses ideas, concepts, and questions and answers. Then we move on to thinking about them and reflection. And these discussions, and we contemplate all these various ideas circling around in our head. And through this process, we start getting, the aspirant starts working out, what are right and wrong notions regarding the self. And this is where the discrimination comes in. And then the last one refers to meditation and realisation. And we have consequent convictions of our truth, about truth, a non-duality, and a state where there is fusion of thought and action, knowing and being. So these practices, with the help of a guru, are believed to lead to correct knowledge and wisdom. So the title of this talk mentioned Jnana Yoga in today's world. And we've already seen that it concerns humanity as a whole. I'd like to take a look at some common problems in the world and throw a Jnana lens over them to see if we can gain any insights in dealing with daily living. But before we do this, I think it would be good to try and clarify something important about the mind. One of the problems we face today when talking about Jnana Yoga, I believe, is perception. When discussed, the emphasis seems to go purely on the intellectual side of the discussion, diluting the contribution of wisdom and self-inquiry. When we review the world around us and what mess man has made of it, It's more than a valid concern that man's intellect is outstripping his moral or spiritual growth. Martin Luther King said, "Our scientific power has outrun our spiritual power. We have guided missiles and misguided men." And even Madame Blavatsky in The Voice of the Silence said, "But even ignorance is better than head learning with no soul wisdom to illuminate and guide it." How can we therefore reconcile the man developing to a high state, his knowledge and intellect in the fifth subrace, can therefore stoop to such misadventure on the physical plane? It's important to realise that mind intelligence is the higher human mind and is critical to man's future. It's the link of the light of the monad to mortal man, and the future state and karmic destiny of man depends on whether manas gravitates downwards towards its animal nature or upwards towards buddhi, the spiritual soul. Master K.H. shed some light on this matter for us in letter 62 in the Mahatma letters. And he said, "If throwing aside every preconceived idea, you could try and impress yourself with this profound truth that intellect is not all-powerful by itself, that to become a mover of mountains, it has first to receive light and life from its high principle spirit, and then would fix your eyes upon everything occult spiritually, trying to develop the faculty according to the rules, then you would soon read the mystery right." So, this imbalance between scientific power and spiritual power has created a world that is full of problems. Let's take a brief look at some of these perils before us that the application of Jnana Yoga can help us understand and deal with. The concrete intellectualism of economic systems with ever-widening gaps between the rich and the poor, the stripping of our global resources to turn a quick buck is all too clear. The lack of true-thinking people is quite prevalent in our society and almost appears to be a plan directly designed by the powers of the left hand. Why is this? Because a dumbed-down society, only interested in the next installment of game show, is not going to help society or humanity's overall progress towards its goals of evolution. These are indeed effective veils of Maya. Regarding these forces arrayed against the forces of light, Theosophy tells us there is no such thing as evil. For what we deem evil or the forces of darkness are twofold. The first being man's lower nature, our shadow, characterised by our own cruelty and selfishness and so forth. The second tool used more consciously by knowing forces, and these work against the stream of evolution, and they use a number of tools to assist them. And what might these tools be? In the compilation of Geoffrey Hodson's work called Sharing the Light, he's articulated a number of them. He said, firstly is the maintenance and increase of the ignorance and mental confusion of humanity. This ignorance is the cause of all human suffering, and our safeguard and cure is knowledge leading to realisation. Such a cure falls under the cloak of Jnana Yoga. Alcohol is another weapon against humanity, which has caused more social degeneracy than any other. Our shield against this is temperance. To this issue, we should also add a growing epidemic of drug use across the planet, which is weakening individuals' will. Economic exploitation with deliberate misuse of money and power skillfully manipulates that greed, hate and fear of our lower nature. And if we witness the global financial crisis, which we're still in the grips of, the average person really feels helpless before the weight of this, unable to survive, let alone help humanity. And militarisation of the planet is also another issue steadily growing worse, not better, since the Second World War. And these perpetual wars are being driven by greed and power. And we can see them moving steadily in our own day, from Afghanistan to Iraq to Syria, and it's slowly moving towards North Korea. So we would perhaps reflect what lies behind this. And cruelty inflicted upon man, woman and child and animals is bad enough. But if we add gossip and slander, it doesn't paint a very nice picture. But the shield we can all use against this, of course, is kindness. The exploitation and injustice to women is unbelievably still going on, although it's encouraging to see a very strong movement starting to tackle this issue head on in both the West and the East. Equality, in this case, is the shield. Materialism and its mantra of take and get is perhaps even worse now than when the Theosophical Society was formed in the 1800s to help counter this growing problem. There is little self-collection and little sense of the presence of God in this people adhering to the tenets of this. So the reaching for spiritual attainment in today's age is really being masked and stunted in the face of such calamities I've just mentioned. So in the face of all of this, it begs the question, why are we so still ignorant? We're taught learning in each incarnation. However, book learning is limited to the incarnation itself. As we make an effort in this direction, and I stress the word effort, the intellect will grow. Learning and understanding with arithmetic comprehension as such life will become easier each time we incarnate. If we are learning each life and it becomes easier, then why are we still hurting each other and ourselves? The answer is because book knowledge and concrete mind intellect is not wisdom. To gain wisdom, we must assimilate the experiences at a deeper level, that which is beyond the physical brain. This assimilation can be achieved via deeper seeking, inquiry, reflection, perception. In other words, Jnana Yoga. It is an approach which is especially suited to the Western candidate. Madame Blavatsky herself stated that the true student of the secret doctrine is a Jnana Yogi, and this path of yoga is the true path for the Western student. She said it is to provide him with the signposts on the path that the secret doctrine has been written. Some might say, in the light of the troubles just reviewed, that we need to stop going down the road of mind, the intellect, that in fact we've gone far enough in this direction and we need to use only the heart instead. However, turning our back on mind is not the right answer. In fact, it is impossible to turn our back on mind. According to Theosophy, the mind is the soul. The mind and the soul are one and the same thing. It is also referred to as our permanent individuality, in contrast with our present personality, and as our ego, using the term ego in its original and literal sense of the meaning, the true I of our being. It is the mind, soul, ego which incarnates and reincarnates from life to life and body to body on a long journey of progressive evolution and inner unfoldment. Madame Blavatsky says on the subject of mind, destroy your thoughts, go beyond mind, give up thinking, live in the realm of no mind, not thought and not thinking, they urge us, apparently unaware that we are minds and that thinkers in evolution, for mind is a term perfectly synonymous with soul. This does not mean a neglect or denial of the aspects and forces of the heart quality. There should be an even and perfect balance between head and heart. Yet, just as the heart is neglected by some aspirants and students to their own detriment, so the head is neglected by many others. The masters say that intuition and intellect ought to be developed and cultivated side by side and at the same rate as one another. In the Bowen Notes, written by a direct student of Madame Blavatsky, he tells us that HBB also said, Theosophy is for those who can think, for those who can drive themselves to think, not mental sluggards. A distinction here is also necessary. The mind and the brain are not the one and same thing. The brain is only an organ, a material vehicle through which the mind is able to function and operate on the physical plane. The mind does not require or use the brain when it functions on other non-physical planes of existence. The brain only lasts for the duration of one lifetime, but the mind continues on. The mind and the ability and action of thinking is something metaphysical, not physical or material. So perhaps a couple of real-world examples would be beneficial to have a look at in light of the problems just elucidated. This is where using one's mind to understand and contemplate an important issue, to really get hold of it and grasp it from different aspects, and then come to a realization and change one's outlook and direction as a result. This is the evidence of Jnana Yoga in action. It is making the use of the three practices discussed earlier. This is a modern issue that we can all relate to. In the news I read recently, a former Facebook executive has spoken out against the social network he helped create, saying it is ripping society apart. The comments were made by Chatham Palihapitiya, who joined Facebook in 2007 and became its vice president for users, the Mail Online reported. He says he feels tremendous guilt for the influence Facebook has had in its ability to manipulate users, suggesting users take a break from using social media altogether. The venture capitalist who has banned his 3 young children from the site took particular aim at the ways people communicate via social media, including hearts, likes and the thumbs up. Palihapitiya believes that this has the power to boost the spread of misinformation and allows people with nefarious intentions to manipulate users. He cited hoax messages about kidnappings that were shared on WhatsApp in India and led to the lynching of 7 innocent people, according to reports in The Verge. Palihapitiya called out not only Facebook but Silicon Valley's entire system of funding. He claimed money pumped into the region would be better spent addressing problems like climate change and disease. Speaking to an audience at Stanford Graduate School of Business, Palihapitiya said, "I think we've created tools that are ripping apart the social fabric of how society works. The short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops we've created are destroying how society works." So I'm sure we've all got a different take on what is going on here and why. But from what I can glean of the situation, Mr. Palihapitiya has used Jnana Yoga's discrimination faculty to understand different effects, impacts and influences that this global website is having on wider society. He's naming the results, such as misinformation, dumbing down of society, and ripping the fabric of society apart. This would be a rather hard conclusion to come to when you yourself help build up the organisation. He then puts into train a new line of action, obviously starting with banning his children from using the site. Some questions may have cropped up in his mind, such as, do I like what I have done? Does it fit in with my own ethical or moral code? What have been the ramifications on other individuals across the world? What has the impact been on society? Is it positive or negative? Once determined negative, what can I do about it? We can see here the hand of Jnana Yoga at play, and perhaps with awareness, inquiry, contemplation and hard questions about self. This is one individual making a radical change in their outlook and behaviour. Wouldn't it be nice to see millions more take on this Jnana Yoga approach? This may or may not be leading to intuitive flashes yet, but we can see an inkling of Jnana Yoga help rend back the veils of illusion for at least one individual. If we take one of the other global problems mentioned, no one can argue that we're not overwhelmed with drug and alcohol problems in our society. 3.3 million people die each year in the States alone from alcohol. Dr. Judson Brewer, who is the Director of Research for the Centre of Mindfulness in the States, has conducted a study into how mindfulness can be most effective in combating this awful disease. He's an associate professor in the Department of Medicine and Psychiatry at the University of Massachusetts. He's also a student of Buddhist psychology, and a psychiatrist who specialises in addiction. He believes the best hope for treating addiction lies in mixing modern science and ancient contemplative practice. He is an evangelist for mindfulness, which uses meditation and other techniques to bring awareness to what we are doing and feeling, especially to habits that drive self-defeating behaviour. In Buddhist philosophy, craving is viewed as the root of all suffering. The Buddha wasn't talking about heroin or ice cream or some compulsions that bring people to Brewer's group. But there's growing evidence that mindfulness can counter the dopamine flood of contemporary life. Researchers at the University of Washington showed that a program based on mindfulness was more effective in preventing drug addiction relapse than 12-step programs. In a head-to-head comparison, Brewer showed that mindfulness training was twice as effective as the gold standard behavioural anti-smoking program. Brewer and others have shown that meditation quiets the posterior cingulate cortex, the neural space involved in the kind of rumination that can lead to a loop of obsession. So what is mindfulness? It is the psychological process of bringing one's attention to experience occurring in the present moment, which can be developed through the practice of meditation and other training. The term mindfulness is a translation of the Pali term sati, which is a significant element of Buddhist traditions. In Buddhist teachings, mindfulness is utilised to develop self-knowledge and wisdom that gradually leads to what is described as enlightenment, or the complete freedom from suffering. Here again, we've seen another example of the application of Jnana Yoga techniques to help overcome serious issues in the world. As I conclude, we see that Jnana Yoga is not an easy path to take, but it does lead to a place of wonderful transcendence. This fascinating journey of new discovery and surprise is described by Robert Bowen in the Bowen Notes. Here he relates what Madame Blavatsky said to her students on raising consciousness by means of this method. She said, "As one progresses in Jnana Yoga, one finds conceptions arising which, though one is conscious of them, one cannot express nor yet formulate into any sort of mental picture. As time goes on, these conceptions will form into mental pictures. This is a time to be on guard and refuse to be deluded with the idea that the newfound and wonderful picture must represent reality. It does not. As one works on, one finds the once admired picture growing dull and unsatisfying, and finally fading out or being thrown away. This is another danger point, because for the moment one is left in a void without any conception to support one, and one may be tempted to revive the cast-off picture for want of a better one to cling to. The true student will, however, work on unconcerned, and presently further formless gleams come, which again in time give rise to a larger and more beautiful picture than the last. But the learner will now know that no picture will ever represent the truth. This last splendid picture will grow dull and fade like the others, and so the process goes on until at last the mind and its pictures are transcended and the learner enters and dwells in the world of no form, but of which all forms are narrow reflections. And what she was talking about, this concept, is beautifully put in The Light of Asia, which is a poetical interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita by Sir Edward Arnold. He said, shall any gazer see with mortal eyes, or any searcher know by mortal mind? Veil after veil will lift, but there must be veil upon veil behind. This greater realization of self and oneness are accompanied by greater kindness and compassion as the light of the soul shines ever more brightly through the personality. The journey to the heart is a natural accompaniment as the aspirant flowers like a lotus before the sun. I'd like to leave you with the following inspiring quote by Swami Vivekananda. He said, when the aspirant cultivates knowledge of the self, of Brahma with love, humility, faith and devotion, he is freed from the round of birth and death in the relative world. Purity of mind, humility of spirit, and unshakable self-control are required for the seeker after Brahma Vidya. Thank you.